Today, I'm going to share with you something from Nietzsche's magnum opus, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, on the transformation that occurs on someone's spiritual journey to become the freest and most functional person they can be. The way that Nietzsche would describe this transformation is essentially that the beast of man has learned to tame himself from within, allowing him to take the most he can get in relation to the self, rather than be sickened and brutalized from the outside, which inevitably makes one sick on the inside. At this point, I am significantly further along in this book than where this transformation is shared, but my mind keeps coming back to this story as I read more, because I see in each subsequent section how this continues to be relatable. And for anyone out there looking to read this book, the importance of understanding this spiritual transformation cannot be discounted. So let's start with the conception of the spirit being applied in this story. The spirit is a tool of the body because you are a body through and through, and soul is just a word for something on the body. He describes the body as a multiplicity with one sense, a war and a peace, a herd and one shepherd. Now, going back to Beyond Good and Evil, one of Nietzsche's other books, when discussing the will as the emotion of command, Nietzsche talks about the man-made fiction of I lending itself to the notion of free will. We like to think that we are captured in something of a unity under the term I, because our stream of experience, which can be most easily perceived in the singular form, lends itself to that perception. But in reality, we are, as Nietzsche writes in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, a multiplicity with one sense. And without diving too deep into all of this and going off track, people have impulses in their psyche that are biologically ingrained, and then some that are present due to the last degree of enculturation. And each impulse is a living being on its own, attempting to control the body to remake the world in its image. This is why when you will something into being, there's the feeling of moving towards something, the feeling of moving away from something, and the sensation of moving at all. Put simply, there's such a multiplicity in our ability to experience that we reduce it down to the simplest form possible, which is to see ourselves as a unity when in reality we are a collection of living beings being coordinated by life itself for the survival of the whole. So now into the spiritual development. A spirit will carry the most that it can, just as a camel. It is a carrying spirit that finds its value in carrying the absolute most that it can. It prefers to display its strength in the rawest form, but this carrying spirit carries even what it does not have to. It lowers itself to carry anything that it can manage in a brutal spite of one's own pride. It abandons any purpose for the sole victory of celebration, basically climbing mountains to, as Nietzsche says, tempt the tempter. It recognizes an illness in the body, but sends the comforters home so that it may make friends with the deaf who will never hear what you want. It's wading into the water of truth, even if it's dirty. It's finding admiration for those who hate us and acquainting ourselves with those who frighten us. But once the spirit is loaded up like a camel, it hurries into the desert. In the desert, there's isolation and loneliness. It is here that the camel wishes to become a master of the desert and search out its own freedom. This is where the second stage of the metamorphosis happens, and it's utterly crucial to understand this transformation. The camel becomes a lion. The lion grows teeth, claws, and a burning desire to seek its last master to fight. This master, this god, is called Thou Shalt, and the lion fights this by saying, I will. So it's the transformation from belittling yourself by allowing the wishes of others to control you under the brutal whip of Thou Shalt, and rising above them and their power to a place of desiring, thinking, and individuality. But the pendulum swings far in the opposite direction. To counteract the massive toll taken on the spirit must grow a ferocity to take back what has been forfeited. So when the camel forfeits the spirit's strength, it's up to the lion to take it back. Nietzsche characterizes this as a battle between the lion and the dragon. The dragon is the master or the god, and the dragon says that it is the measure of all things. All value and all things created come from the dragon, and the dragon wills that there is to be no one who says, I will. So, while the lion may create freedom for itself, it cannot create new values, but it can take the right to create new values, because that's the work of a predatory animal. The beast of man must find his predatory side, but it will only be revealed when he needs it most. The carrying spirit once revered the command, thou shalt, as its most sacred piece to existence. But now it must find evil and decay in what was most sacred to it for the purpose of wresting freedom away from it. But Nietzsche asks, what is the child capable of that even the lion is not? The child is innocence in forgetting, a new beginning, a game, a wheel rolling out of itself, a first movement, a sacred yes saying. To create requires one to say yes. The child spirit now wants its will, not the world's will. It wants its own world. These are the three metamorphoses of the spirit, and understanding each is very crucial to your own development. Even before reading Thus Spoke Zarathustra, I had written some things that used the analogy of a camel in the desert, and I realized that at that point in my life, I had literally felt as if I was a camel stranded in the desert with no direction, suitably loaded up with baggage that I began to slunk off in the sand. But finally, I was alone. Finally, there was isolation, and I could work to become the master of my own domain. I could take what I wanted in this world for myself. And one thing that Nietzsche doesn't mention is that the spirit can revert back if you're not careful. The smallest inferior part of a cycle will degenerate the whole. So the lion has to seek out these inferior parts and rip them to shreds to maintain the whole. And I'm still in the lion stage, but the reason that I'm telling you about this story at all is that I know people who live their entire lives as a camel. They live their entire lives serving some master that has imposed its own will on the individual. Reject this, because if you accept it, you're rejecting life. The greatest sin against the body is lethargy, or put another way, stagnation. And the greatest sin against the Holy Spirit is harming the body. So think about this story and assess where you are at this point in your life. I put out videos like this and I do the philosophical writing that I do because we've had so many lies sold to us on what it means to be free or what the true extent of freedom is that can ever be attained. But first, identify man-made fictions, such as virtue, which leads to idealism and idolization, and recognize that your ideals will destroy your will to live, and you will die by your virtues, or virtue if you're lucky. My journey to freedom started with my identification of man-made fictions, among them, ironically enough, identification and categorization. Then you wander into the desert. Then you grow teeth and ferocity. Then you'll discover what it means to live freely.